I was abandoned 200 miles from home as a joke. I changed the locks, filed for divorce, exposed the cruelty, and rebuilt a life in freedom. Years of marriage meant something, that the countless moments we'd shared had built a foundation of respect, if not love. How wrong I was. The signs were always there, the subtle dismissals, the jokes at my expense that weren't really jokes, the way her friends looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. But I chose to ignore them, choosing peace over confrontation. The trip was meant to be a weekend getaway with her friends and their partners, a lakeside cabin, barbecues, and hiking trails. Nothing extraordinary. When they suggested a day trip to a nearby national park, I agreed despite not feeling well. I should have stayed behind. After hiking for hours, I sat down, exhausted. "I need a break," I said, my head pounding from dehydration. "You guys go ahead, I'll catch up." They nodded sympathetically. My wife kissed my forehead, said she'd bring back water, and they disappeared around the bend. An hour passed, then 2. I called her repeatedly straight to voicemail. As sunset approached, I painfully made my way back to the parking lot. Our car was gone. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had left me. I managed to flag down a park ranger who let me use the office phone. My wife finally answered, laughter in the background. "Oh, you're still there? We thought you'd figure it out sooner. Consider it a little adventure." More laughter. "We're already halfway home. Enjoy the walk." Then she hung up. The ranger looked at me with pity that burned worse than my blistered feet. 200 miles from home, no car, limited cash, no hotel for miles. The cruel joke, the casual cruelty of it, left me breathless. That night, sleeping on a bench in the ranger station, something inside me broke and reformed. The hurt crystallized into clarity. This wasn't a prank gone wrong. This was the culmination of years of disrespect, the final message that I meant nothing. 3 days. That's how long it took me to get home through a combination of bus rides, hitchhiking, and walking. 3 days of ignored calls and mocking text messages from her. Having fun yet? Almost home or still enjoying nature? Each one a nail in the coffin of our marriage. During those 3 days, something fundamental shifted within me. The desperate desire to understand why they'd done this, why she had done this, faded into irrelevance. The why didn't matter anymore. Only my response did. I reached our neighborhood as the sun rose on the 4th day, dirty, exhausted, and changed. But I didn't go home immediately. First, I needed to visit someone who could help me ensure that when my wife returned from her extended girls' trip, she would find exactly what she deserved. Standing at the curb, looking at the house we'd shared, I made a vow to myself. This would be the last time she would ever have the opportunity to hurt me. Some bonds, once broken, should not be repaired. And with that thought firmly in mind, I turned and walked toward the hardware store that had just opened for the day. The hardware store clerk raised an eyebrow at my appearance, but asked no questions when I purchased new locks. My next stop was the bank, where I withdrew half of our joint savings, just enough to rent a hotel room and hire a lawyer. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from her friends, all variations of "Can't you take a joke?" and "Why are you being so dramatic?" I silenced them all. The locksmith arrived within the hour, a quiet man who worked efficiently. "Marriage problems?" he asked, noticing my wedding ring. I nodded, too exhausted for explanations. "Been there," he said, handing me the new keys. "Just remember, changing locks is the easy part." In the hotel shower, I watched 3 days of grime circle the drain. My reflection in the mirror showed sunburned skin and hollow eyes. I barely recognized myself. The man staring back seemed older, harder. Good. I needed that hardness for what came next. My lawyer listened without interruption as I recounted the abandonment and emotional cruelty. She noted everything, typing rapidly. "And potentially criminal, they left you in a dangerous situation." She outlined the divorce process with clinical precision. "Do you have evidence of the abandonment? Text messages, call logs?" I did. Everything was documented. Meanwhile, my wife was still oblivious. Her social media showed her and her friends at a resort 3 hours away, an extended celebration of their hilarious prank. Glasses raised in toasts, poolside selfies, not a shred of remorse. Each image strengthened my resolve. For 3 days, I moved methodically, changing passwords, securing important documents, informing my workplace of my situation. I visited our bank again to open a separate account. The manager's face showed recognition when I explained why. "Unfortunately common," she said quietly. "You're doing the right thing, protecting yourself." My phone rang just before midnight on the third day. Her name flashed on the screen. I answered but said nothing. "Hey," she said, her voice slurred from alcohol. "We're heading home tomorrow. You're not still mad, are you?" When I remained silent, her tone shifted from playful to irritated. "Seriously? It was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny, even the guys." "I'll be waiting," I finally replied, then hung up. Those 3 words contained a multitude, a promise, a warning. I slept soundly for the first time since the abandonment. On the morning of their return, I went home to complete my preparations. The divorce papers waited on the kitchen table beside photographs of the text messages she'd sent mocking my predicament. I'd also printed screenshots of her social media posts about the prank, each one damning evidence of her character. The security camera I'd installed captured her arrival. She was laughing as she approached the door, overnight bag slung over her shoulder. Then confusion as her key failed to work, irritation as she tried again, anger as she pounded on the door, shouting my name. I watched it all from my phone at the coffee shop across the street, feeling nothing but a cold certainty that I was doing the right thing. When she finally called, her voice was shrill with outrage. "Why can't I get in? Did you change the locks?" I confirmed that I had. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, I said. "We need to talk." She started to protest, but I ended the call. As I walked back toward the house that would soon be just hers or just mine, I rehearsed what I would say. No accusations, no raised voice, just the calm delivery of consequences. The moment that would define the rest of our lives approached with each step, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely certain of my path. She was sitting on the front steps when I approached, her face a storm of emotions. When she saw me, she stood abruptly, words already spilling out. "This isn't funny. I've been waiting out here for an hour." I walked past her to unlock the door, saying nothing. Her voice followed me inside. "So you changed the locks?" Really mature response to a harmless joke. I placed my keys on the counter and turned to face her. The speech I'd rehearsed evaporated. Instead, I simply handed her the folder containing the divorce papers. She stared at them, uncomprehending at first. Then realization dawned. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice suddenly small. 200 miles, I said, my voice steady. "You abandoned me 200 miles from home. No transportation, limited funds, no nearby accommodation. You ignored my calls for help and mocked my situation. You extended your vacation to celebrate. These aren't the actions of someone who loves their partner. These are the actions of someone who has contempt for them." She began to cry, tears that looked rehearsed somehow. It was just supposed to be funny, everyone thought. I cut her off by pulling out my phone and playing a recording of her laughter from that first call, her voice saying, "Enjoy the walk." The sound filled the kitchen, harsh and cruel in the quiet house. "I had 3 days to think while trying to get home," I continued when the recording ended. 3 days to reflect on our marriage. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was just the most extreme example of how you truly feel about me. Her tactics shifted rapidly. Defensiveness, minimization, sudden remorse. "I made a terrible mistake," she pleaded. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling." When I didn't respond, anger flashed across her face. "You're overreacting. It was one mistake in 10 years of marriage." I gestured to the papers. "My lawyer's information is included. I'm staying elsewhere until this is resolved." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You can't just throw away our marriage over this. What will everyone think? What will I tell my parents?" For the first time, I laughed. "Tell them the truth. Tell them you abandoned your husband for a laugh, and he finally recognized his worth." I gently removed her hand. "The house is yours until we determine asset division. I've taken only what's indisputably mine." She followed me to the door, her voice rising with each step. "Where am I supposed to go if you take the house? How will I afford anything? You know I just started my new job." The desperation in her voice struck me as odd, not concern for our relationship, but for her own comfort and security. "You should have considered these questions before leaving me stranded," I replied, stepping outside. Her friend's car pulled up just then, their curious faces visible through the windows. "Perfect timing. Your support system has arrived. Perhaps they can help you understand the consequences of your actions." As I walked to my car, I heard her burst into theatrical sobs for her approaching friends. I caught fragments of her version of events, how unreasonable I was being, how disproportionate my response. One friend hurried over, attempting to intercept me. "Don't you think you're taking this too far?" she demanded. It was just a stupid prank that went wrong. I paused, looking her directly in the eyes. Would you like me to abandon you in a national park and see how stupid it feels? She stepped back, momentarily speechless. That's what I thought, I said, continuing to my car. Driving away, I felt a curious lightness. The anger that had fueled me for days was receding, replaced by something else, not happiness exactly, but clarity. The rearview mirror showed a group huddled around my soon-to-be ex-wife on our front lawn, their gestures animated. I adjusted the mirror so I couldn't see them anymore. The road ahead demanded my full attention now. The aftermath was swift and loud. My phone exploded with messages from her family, her friends, even mutual acquaintances we hadn't spoken to in years. I silenced them all, responding only to my lawyer's updates. She told me my wife had contacted her, alternating between threats and pleas for reconciliation. Standard behavior, my lawyer assured me. Stay the course. A week passed. I settled into a routine at my extended stay hotel, finding unexpected peace and solitude. My focus shifted to rebuilding. I worked extra hours, joined a gym, reconnected with friends I'd gradually lost touch with during my marriage, friends who had once expressed concerns about her treatment of me. Then came the social media campaign. My wife's carefully crafted posts portrayed her as the victim of an overreacting husband who abandoned her over one misunderstanding. Comments flooded in with sympathetic responses and condemnations of my character. Several contained thinly veiled threats. I documented everything and sent it to my lawyer, who added it to our growing file. She's outside, texted my coworker one afternoon. I exited through the back door, avoiding the confrontation she clearly sought. That night, she emailed me a lengthy apology that mentioned her suffering 4 times more than my abandonment. I never meant to hurt you, she wrote, though the evidence suggested otherwise. I've learned my lesson. But then came the financial retaliation. Joint credit card maxed out on frivolous purchases, attempts to withdraw from our remaining joint accounts thwarted only by the freezes I'd requested. Each move validated my decision to end the marriage, though a small part of me still grieved for what we might have been. The mediation session was scheduled for exactly 1 month after the abandonment. I arrived early, centered, and prepared. My lawyer nodded approvingly at my calm demeanor. Many clients arrive emotional, she said. You're making my job easier. My wife entered with her lawyer, a stern woman with calculating eyes. I noticed immediately that my wife had transformed herself. Conservative dress, subdued makeup, hair pulled back, the image of contrition. Our eyes met briefly before she looked down, a practiced display of remorse. The mediator began by establishing ground rules, but my wife's lawyer immediately interrupted. My client wishes to make a statement before we begin. The mediator hesitated, then nodded. My wife unfolded a paper with trembling hands. Another performance. I made a terrible mistake, she began, voice quavering. One thoughtless action that I will regret forever. But I believe our 10 years together deserve more than a hasty divorce. I'm asking for another chance to prove my love and commitment. Her lawyer jumped in. My client has enrolled in therapy to address her behavior. She's willing to agree to any reasonable conditions for reconciliation, including post-nuptial agreements with severe penalties for any future misconduct. My lawyer started to respond, but I placed a hand on her arm. May I? She nodded. I looked directly at my wife for the first time in weeks. I appreciate the sentiment, I said evenly, but this isn't about punishment or redemption. This is about recognition. I finally recognized that we're fundamentally incompatible. There's nothing to save. My wife's facade cracked. That's not true, she exclaimed, tears appearing instantly. We had a good marriage. Everyone said so. The mediator raised a hand. But my wife continued, her voice rising. You're throwing away 10 years over one mistake. Who does that? I remained calm. It wasn't one mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern. The abandonment simply made that pattern impossible to ignore any longer. I turned to the mediator. I'm prepared to be generous in the financial settlement. I just want this resolved quickly. My wife's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head violently. He's punishing me, she insisted. This is revenge, plain and simple. Her eyes narrowed, voice dropping to a hiss. You'll regret this. No one will ever love you like I did. The mediator called for a break. As we filed out, my lawyer squeezed my shoulder. That outburst just strengthened our position, she murmured. I nodded but took no satisfaction in it. There were no winners here, only survivors. The mediation failed. My wife refused every reasonable proposal, demanding counseling instead of division of assets. Her lawyer eventually pulled her aside. Their whispered argument was visible through the glass partition walls. I remained seated, a strange calm washing over me. This too was familiar, her inability to accept reality when it contradicted her desires. "We'll proceed to court," my lawyer informed me afterward. "But don't worry, judges have seen this behavior before. Her delaying tactics won't work forever." I nodded, resigned to the longer timeline, but unwavering in my resolve. What I hadn't anticipated was the community division. Friends chose sides. Family members who had always treated me as one of their own now viewed me with suspicion. My wife's narrative that I was cruel and unforgiving had taken root in fertile ground. "You really won't give her another chance?" asked a friend over coffee, his expression troubled. "Everyone makes mistakes." I studied him, wondering how he would feel abandoned in the wilderness. His calls for help met with mockery. "Some mistakes reveal fundamental truths," I replied. He didn't contact me again. 3 months after the abandonment, I received a letter from her therapist suggesting a joint session. My lawyer advised against it. "It's a trap," she warned. "Anything you say can be twisted and used against you." I declined the invitation, sending a brief, polite refusal. The response was immediate, a barrage of texts accusing me of sabotaging her recovery, of being heartless and vindictive. I changed my phone number the next day. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, earning recognition that had eluded me during my marriage. I realized how much energy had been diverted to managing her emotions, defending against her subtle criticisms. Without that constant drain, I thrived. Then came the ambush at my parents' home during a Sunday dinner. She arrived uninvited, tearful and clutching photographs from happier times. My mother, always her advocate, had orchestrated the encounter. "Just talk to her," my mother pleaded. "That's all she's asking." I excused myself, stepping outside to collect my thoughts. My father followed. "I don't understand why you can't forgive her," he said, his disappointment palpable. I faced him, suddenly angry. "Would you forgive someone who left mom stranded in the middle of nowhere as a joke, who laughed while she struggled to find her way home?" He fell silent, consideration dawning on his face. "I didn't know it was like that," he finally said. "She told us it was a misunderstanding, that you'd fallen behind hiking and they thought you'd catch the next shuttle." "There was no shuttle," I replied quietly, "just wilderness and night falling. She knew exactly what she was doing." I showed him the text messages I'd preserved. His expression hardened as he read them, especially when he reached the ones where she joked about me being finally gone. "Wait here," he said, returning to the house. Through the window, I watched him confront her, watched her expression shift from confidence to panic. My mother's hands flew to her mouth in shock. Minutes later, my wife stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She didn't look at me as she passed. That night, my father called to apologize. "We should have asked for your side first," he said, voice heavy with regret. "I'm sorry." The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immense validation I hadn't realized I desperately needed. The next court date approached. My lawyer warned me that my wife had hired a more aggressive attorney, one known for scorched earth tactics. "Prepare for personal attacks," she advised. "They'll try to provoke an emotional response." I spent the night before court reviewing our history, not just the abandonment, but the years of subtle undermining, the jokes at my expense, the friendships with people who clearly disliked me. I had allowed it all, mistaking her behavior for playfulness, confusing longevity with love. Never again. Morning arrived with unexpected serenity. Whatever happened in court, I had already won the most important battle, reclaiming my sense of self-worth. As I knotted my tie, I studied my reflection. The man looking back was stronger, wiser, unbowed, ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, intimate enough that I could hear my wife's nervous breathing 3 seats away. Her new lawyer, a silver-haired man with predatory eyes, whispered constantly in her ear. My own lawyer sat beside me, composed and prepared. "Remember," she murmured, "no matter what they say, stay calm." Their strategy became apparent immediately: character assassination. The lawyer painted me as controlling, unreasonable, prone to overreaction. "My client made one regrettable error in judgment during an otherwise harmonious 10-year marriage," he declared. "An error she has repeatedly apologized for, yet her husband refuses all reconciliation efforts, suggesting deeper issues of vindictiveness." My lawyer's rebuttal was methodical. She presented the text messages, the social media posts, the recorded phone calls, the timeline of my 3-day journey home including receipts from the bus station and the motel where I'd spent one night. Most damning was the park ranger's statement describing my condition when found: dehydrated, disoriented, potentially at risk had nightfall come before assistance. This was not a harmless prank, my lawyer concluded. This was a deliberate act of cruelty that endangered my client's well-being. The subsequent behavior, mocking texts, celebrations, social media defamation, reveals not remorse but continued malice. The judge's face remained impassive throughout, but I noticed her eyes narrowing during the presentation of evidence. When my wife's lawyer began to speak again, the judge raised a hand. "I've heard enough," she said. "We'll take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I expect both parties to be prepared for my decision regarding temporary orders." In the hallway, my wife approached despite her lawyer's attempt to stop her. "This is insane," she hissed. "You're destroying everything over nothing." I studied her face, the familiar contours now twisted with anger and fear. There was no love there. Perhaps there never had been. "It wasn't nothing to me," I replied quietly. She flinched at my calm tone, clearly expecting, perhaps hoping for an angry outburst. Before she could respond, her lawyer pulled her away, his expression thunderous. When court resumed, the judge's ruling was decisive. Temporary orders heavily in my favor, exclusive use of our home awarded to me, temporary spousal support set at a minimal amount given the marriage length and my wife's employment. Most importantly, an explicit acknowledgement of the abandonment as a significant factor in her decision. "Court takes a dim view of psychological cruelty," the judge stated, looking directly at my wife. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the respondent's actions showed wanton disregard for the petitioner's safety and well-being." Outside the courthouse, rain fell in sheets, matching my wife's tears as she huddled with her lawyer beneath an inadequate umbrella. I felt no satisfaction in her distress, only relief that the truth had been recognized. My lawyer squeezed my arm. "This is just the beginning," she warned. "Stay vigilant." But it wasn't the beginning. It was the end. 2 days later, my wife's lawyer contacted mine with a settlement offer, reasonable terms. No further court appearances required. "She's finally understood her position," my lawyer explained. The judge's reaction frightened her. 6 months to the day after being abandoned in the wilderness, I signed the final divorce papers. The marriage that had consumed a decade of my life was dissolved in moments with the stroke of a pen. I stepped outside the lawyer's office and tilted my face to the sun, feeling its warmth like a benediction. That evening, a text arrived from an unknown number, her, of course. "I never meant for things to end this way," it read. "I hope someday you can forgive me." I considered responding, then decided against it. Some chapters need no epilogue. A year passed. I sold the house full of memories, both bitter and sweet, moved to a different city, built a new life brick by brick, career advancement, new friends, eventually even cautious dating. The abandonment became a story I rarely told, not out of lingering pain, but because it no longer defined me. Then came the unexpected encounter at a conference. She looked different, thinner, hair shorter, eyes wary. When she spotted me across the hotel lobby, for a moment I considered avoiding her. Instead, I nodded politely and continued my conversation. Later, she approached as I waited for an elevator. "You look well," she said, voice tentative. I thanked her, noting she seemed nervous, so different from the confident woman who had once laughed at my distress. "I've been in therapy," she continued, words rushing out. "I understand now what I did, how wrong it was. I'm truly sorry." The elevator arrived. I held the door, considering my response. "I'm glad therapy has helped you," I finally said. "I hope you find happiness." Simple words, sincere but distant. I stepped into the elevator. Our eyes met one final time as the doors closed between us. In that moment, I realized the journey that began with abandonment had led ironically to freedom. Not just from a toxic marriage, but from the anger that once threatened to consume me. I had survived not just those 3 desperate days, but the harder days that followed. And in surviving, I had found myself again.